Howdy. So, one thing that you will notice about us is we are goofy. Yeah, we're goofy. We're just goofy. And you'll see that various different pictures that we've got in our slideshow just kind of shows how our relationship has just gotten more and more goofy the entire time that we've been together. So, yeah, we know it. You can laugh at us. That's totally fine. Branson does it all the time, so it's totally okay. So just enjoy yourselves while we're here, and there will be some times where it gets serious. It gets a little bit more uh, detailed inside of our testimony, but just know that everything that we've gone through, everything that we've experienced in our life is God has honored our marriage and has honored our lives this entire time. So, yeah. So,
Okay. Well, like they said earlier, it's Chris and Hannah Hamilwright. Right now, I currently work actually here at the church. I'm the youth and worship admin assistant. What does that mean? That means that I help Cody and Steven with anything they need. I help plan, create, organize, anything they do so they can do ministry more. I also do a lot of our publications here at the church, social media, graphics, all that stuff. Why did I do this? Well, I actually, I'll talk a little bit in a minute, but my dad's a pastor, and so I grew up as a pastor's kid. And I realized while I was in college that I really felt called to help pastors. I didn't want to be the leader, but I want to be the one that helps them behind the scenes so that they have more time to do ministry. And so I love getting to do this and be a part of Northside in that way.
and I'm a band director. I work at Victoria East and also at Stroman. Just kind of go back and forth. But the reason why I chose to be a band director is actually because of my dad. My dad is a band director, for those of you who know my dad. He was a band director for 39-ish years. But he had a pretty big impact on my life in the sense that he introduced music to me. And pretty much my entire family, my mom and my dad both were very heavily music oriented. My mom sang a lot, and especially in church, and then my dad played his instruments and let me experiment a few times on various different instruments. I actually started playing trumpet whenever I was only like 4 years old. And that was not my dad's design. He hated that. But I was stubborn because I'm a stubborn child, and I wanted to do that. So, and my brothers were playing trumpet, so I decided I was going to do that. So, pretty much from an early age, I just fell in love with music. And so, by the time I got into middle school, I had decided I was going to be a band director, and that's where it led me. Um, so, all of that to say, that's a large reason why I am a band director, because of my dad and the musical upbringing. So, yeah.
Okay, Hanley, when you get a second, if we go to the next slide. These next pictures are just some of our family. We have a daughter, Evelyn, who's 3, and Sarah, who's 1, and that's our dog, Bee. We had her first. She's our first baby. But they're just a lot of fun. Evelyn is...
She's also an old
grumpy dog, yeah.
Lady.
Ridiculous.
Ridiculous.
But Evelyn is very joyous. She loves to sing. She loves to dance. She likes to dress up like a ballerina, but she also likes to play in the mud and run. And she likes to collect sticks all over, everywhere.
And rocks.
And rocks.
We experienced that just as we were coming here.
Yeah, we told her she couldn't bring rocks in the car. So, and she's also very strong-willed, so that's fun. But
I take full credit for that.
Yeah.
Or blame.
And
decided. She calls it blame, I call it credit.
Sarah's 1, so we don't know a lot about her yet, but her personality's coming out, and I'm curious to see how Evelyn reacts as Sarah can mess with her now. So that's going to be interesting. And Chris, back to you.
So, just my early childhood. We're going to go way to the back of whenever I was growing up. I was a young child. I grew up in the church. Some of you have experienced that same thing where you've been in church all your life, and some of you haven't, and that's totally fine. I had the blessing of having two wonderful parents that they really pushed us to go to church, to be involved, and to get involved as much as you could. My mom was the youth minister at our little old church down in Port Lavaca. Y'all know where Port Lavaca is? Yeah. Alamo Heights Baptist Church. She was the youth minister there for several years throughout my older two brothers' time in youth. Unfortunately, I did not get to go through her youth ministry program because she was done by that point, but it is what it is. And then my dad, he got to do a little bit of worship interim leader, and he was also one of the deacons in our church. So, I mean, we had a very good upbringing that led us to getting exposed to Christianity and to God in various different ways. But one of the things that really impressed upon me was getting involved. My mom was always a proponent of going and doing. Even if I didn't want to, she said, okay, well, you're still going to go. I'm sorry. But even when, like I said, my mom was not in the youth ministry anymore by the time I got into, that's okay. By the time I got into youth, and so about the time that I started entering, we were going youth minister after youth minister after youth minister, and from that, our youth ministry started dwindling, getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So that forced me to step up and say, all right, well, here we go. And so I kind of got forced into being a leader in the youth group. Not something that I necessarily wanted to do, because that's work. Who wants to do that? But it's definitely one thing that God he knew that I needed that push. I needed to be involved to make sure that I was doing the right thing at the right time. So that's kind of my upbringing in the church.
So like I mentioned a minute ago, my dad is a pastor. Growing up, he was youth and worship pastor minister at a couple different churches. We moved to Port Lavaca when I was in 3rd grade, and I was there through high school. So that's really kind of where I grew up, basically. I remember our other towns, but not so much. And so my mom, she is a counselor. And so I grew up with a pastor and a counselor, so there's lots of insight in my house of people's minds and how they work. But it benefited me a lot. I understood people, and it was really beneficial. I also have a brother. He has 2 brothers, and I didn't mention that. I have a brother who's 6 years younger than me, so I'm the oldest. Chris is the baby. Anyway, fun dynamics there. I accepted Christ when I was 5, and I've never doubted that. I still, even though there's a lot of things when you're young, you start forgetting. You'll learn that one of these days. I never doubted it. I've remembered what happened. I remember where I was. I remember what I said. My parents decided to raise me to be independent for some reason, and so I actually did it by myself up front at church. And then I came back to the pew and was like, hey, Mom, I just accepted Christ. And she's like, you did what? So, but I'm very thankful for that and that upbringing. That pushed me, with my dad being the youth minister, I was obviously very involved in the youth group. Unlike Chris, it was more by choice. I was more motivated to do that. I was on our youth leadership team and praise band. And this led to lots of ministry opportunities while I was in junior high and high school. We did lots of in our town missions, as well as state, out of state, and then I actually got to go on an international mission trip my junior year of high school. We went to Bolivia. And so I had so many opportunities that were afforded to me, and I'm so thankful for, and as you'll see through my story here in a minute, it allowed me to really grow, but also I chose to do that. I could have been like, oh, my dad's a youth minister, I don't want to do this. But instead, I chose to enjoy it. I chose to help out, to be a servant leader, and to find ways to make myself feel like I was a part of the ministry too. And so I'm very thankful for that upbringing and the knowledge it gives me. And I really understand all these pastors here after growing up like that. So it's definitely helped me out in my job.
I forgot to mention I did accept Christ whenever I was 6. So That was part of my story too. I forgot to mention that. But yeah, so how did we meet? Well, like I mentioned, my dad was a band director. I was obviously in band because I loved it, and now I'm a band director. She's musically inclined. She decided, well, I want to do band too. So we met in the band hall at the Travis Middle School. Anybody know where that's at? Travis Middle School in Port Lavaca? Yeah. So that's where we met. My 7th grade year, I think, something like that.
Yeah, I
Her
was in
6th
sixth
grade
grade.
year. And by the time we got into 7th grade, she was in 7th grade, I was in 8th grade. My dad thought it was a great idea to sit us next to each other. And so she was last chair saxophone, I was first chair trumpet.
Thanks. You could have just said we sat next to each
I
other.
have to mention it. She's not as instrumentally inclined, but I'm sure you've all heard her sing before, and she's got a beautiful voice, right? Yeah, if y'all been in, yeah, okay, anyway. So we sat next to each other every single day. And every single day, I would mess with her, I would poke her, and she would because she was ticklish. Now she's not. I can't.
It's his fault too.
And I would mess with her saxophone. And then finally one day, my dad was in the middle of rehearsal, and she had had enough. And she said, "Chris, stop touching me," as loud as possible. And my dad just stopped rehearsal, stared at me, and then went back on. Just kept going. And that did not stop me. I still continued to mess with her. I think I left her alone for about a week, and then I kept going. And those of you who might have somebody that picks on you, or you pick on somebody, just be careful who you pick on, because you might end up being married to them, and you don't really know it. So that was definitely a fun part of my middle school time, was messing with her. And she didn't really know that I liked her, but I did like her. And so I always say that she hated me during middle school, but she
I
says
didn't
that
hate him.
she was
He was
just
just
annoyed
annoying.
with me. Whatever. But
So we were in junior high together. We went to high school together. Briefly, at the beginning of my high school career, so I was a freshman, he was a sophomore. We dated for 3 to 5 months. We disagree on how long we dated. Anyway, we dated very briefly when we were really young. Chris ended it, but we
because I was an idiot. That's just how it was.
over some time, we became friends. We maintained our friendship through high school. These pictures are actually later in high school when we were just friends. Some band banquets and choir banquets. And so we were able to stay friends. That picture of us in the band setting, that's a jazz band set up at the hospital in Port Lavaca. And actually, that was my senior year. Chris had already graduated, but our band director asked Chris to come back and help the trumpets out for that gig. So once again, we kept getting thrown back together, even though we were not in school together anymore.
I will say, even though I did end it, I really didn't end it in my heart. I was still she would talk about boys in various different stages of that late high school, early college life, and it tore me up inside. I had to know who it was, I had to know what kind of person he was, and so on and so forth, because I didn't like it. And there was a reason why I didn't like it, but she didn't know that until later.
So after dating Chris for just a few months, I never dated anybody else again. It wasn't because of him. It's just because if there was a guy that was interested in me, they didn't meet my standards. And if there was a guy I was interested in, they weren't interested in me. Which at the time and in high school and junior high, that was really hard. To not have a boyfriend and not have that person who likes you and makes you feel special in that way. It was hard, and it was definitely different, and you don't really understand why, no one wants to date you or anything like that. But looking back on it, I'm so thankful. I was protected from so much heartache and drama that I never had to deal with, and even into college, I never dated anyone else. The only person I've ever dated and been with is Chris. And I know that everybody can say that, and it may not be your story, but that's my story, and I'm so thankful for that. I don't have any of that emotional baggage from past relationships, and so that's just something that was a really big blessing in my life. So my encouragement to you is be friends with people. And I mean, if you're meant to be together, trust me, God's going to get you together. You'll see that later through our story. So Chris didn't mention it like I thought he was going to. But one way that we kind of stayed in communication once I went to college, I went to DBU, which is Dallas Baptist University. So, like I said, Chris graduated a year before me. He was going to VC for a couple years, and then he later transferred to UT Arlington. But I was at Dallas Baptist University, and so at that time, Chris was still in Port Lavaca, Victoria area, and so we were kept in contact and stuff like that. But we were just good friends. And during that first year of college, I wouldn't say like I was distant from the Lord. I mean, I was at a Baptist university. I went to chapel. I got involved in a church. I was in Bible studies, but like my own personal walk with the Lord wasn't really growing. I wasn't spending time with God one-on-one. I wasn't making that a priority, and so I kind of felt it through that first semester. I honestly can't remember exactly what it was, but I remember just feeling very convicted about it, and I was like, why do I feel so distant from the Lord? And I mean, clearly it's because I wasn't spending time with him and building that relationship. So I decided that I was going to sacrifice sleep and wake up early and spend some time with God every day. It was definitely for sure like Monday through Fridays. Saturday, I didn't have to wake up as early. Sunday, I was getting ready for church. So there's grace in your plans, right? In that time, I decided to text a group of friends every day a verse to hold me accountable, because if they were expecting me to send them a verse every morning, then I better get up and do my quiet time. And so there's just something for me. And so Chris was in that group text, and so he was getting verses from me every day, apparently God wanting him to be reminded about me.
Yeah, one thing she did, like before she sent out the group text thing, she prefaced it with, if you don't want to be on this list, then just send me a message and I'll take you off. My immediate thought was, I don't want to get verse texts every single day, but I do want to get a text from you every single day. So, again, she had no idea this was going on in my head.
Did not.
Yeah.
We're kind of going sort of chronologically, not chronologically in our talk tonight. So this is something else I just want to share with you that I learned in college. I also have always been a worrier and someone who stresses out about everything. And I always just consider like, well, it's just what it is. I know God's going to take care of it, but I'm still going to worry about it and try to fix it myself. And so I heard this verse one day. It's in 1 John 4:18, and it says, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love. And it hit me like a ton of bricks, guys. I realized when I fear, when I worry, when I stress and try to take it all on myself, I'm rejecting God's love for me. And when I realized that, I was like, I can't do this. I can't reject his love. That's not what I want to do. And so it's not, I wouldn't say like, I'm healed, I never stress. But the difference is when I stress and worry, I turn it over to God. And when I do that, I am being perfected in his love. And so that's just another thing that I learned while I was in college. I've got one more thing that I learned while I was in college, and that's being involved in a church while you're in college. I joined and became a member all by myself at First Baptist Irving. It's just up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. They had a great college ministry and worship ministry, and I already had some friends who went there, and so after going for like 2 weeks, I knew this was home. And so I joined, and that was important to me, not to just go and just keep coming, but to actually be a member of the church and be involved there. And so through that, I After my freshman year, I started being on the college leadership team my sophomore year and getting more involved in their music ministry, being in choir and helping with their children's choirs. And later down the road, that led to me having an internship at that church. And so really getting some experience in the church for what God later told me was what I was going to be doing.
So, after we've talked about all of this whole like breakup stuff at high school and
Yeah, we're backtracking.
backtracking a little bit, just to kind of pick up my story. After I broke up with Hannah, that was a very big pivotal moment of my life. I took a very slow downward spiral, just falling for Satan's temptations with girls. It just kept spiraling until finally it led to very poor decisions with a girl that I was trying to witness to. She did not know Christ, but she was asking questions, and I got more intimately involved with her, and that it led to very poor decisions, and that has it still sticks with me every single day, almost. It's something that Satan likes to throw at me, like, hey, you're not good enough for Hannah because you did that. And that was, it's something that I constantly struggle with. But one thing that has been good is God has redeemed me, and it's something that that I had to ask forgiveness for. One thing that I need to mention is I still don't know her outcome. I don't know if she has accepted Christ after all of those questions or not, but all of my efforts were ruined just because of my sin, because of my desires, my own personal desires of wanting to do what I wanted to do and not follow God's plan for my life. And so you had...
So adding on to that, I don't know why. I think I was reading a book or I had heard someone talk. Apparently, I can't remember all the details of a lot of things. But God had revealed to me, I had always assumed that I was saving myself for marriage and that I would marry someone who was the same. And like, this was not like when Chris was in the picture at all. This was a whole separate time in my life. But God reminded me that, okay, well, if God's forgiven that person and redeemed them, why should I not also forgive and redeem someone? So I realized that the person I marry someday may not have saved themselves. And so it's, I think that's just another little part of our story that God had already prepared my heart to have that realization and understanding before we even got to a point, like I had no idea what was going on in his life.
I don't think I was even in UTA whenever you
No,
came to that realization.
no, I was actually, I think, in high school. So this is like way before any of that. And God revealed that to me, and so I held on to that in my heart and my mind. And so later, Chris, I feel like it's jumping ahead, but he had to, well, before we started dating again in college, which we'll touch on in a minute, he had to confess that to me because he knew that I was saving myself. So, it's a sin. Sin has consequences. And it's, even once you're redeemed and healed with the Lord, that doesn't mean you don't have to be healed and forgiven by other people. And so that was something he had to share with me, and I forgave him, and was also able to share that story that God had already moved in my heart in that way. And so that's just another a reminder of how awesome God is, and that he prepares you, and all the experiences in your life are leading towards something. You just don't know what it is all the time.
Yeah. So after going in that route, this was like early college for me, I quickly turned back to God because I knew that I was not going to make it if I didn't. So I quickly turned towards God for restoration and for forgiveness. And like I said, I still have that regret today that Satan likes to throw at me just to bring me down. But one thing that helped me kind of jump that hurdle to get back on track towards God was a book called Every Young Man's Battle. I don't know if any of the young men in here have read it before, but I've got a quote in here that the book is in regards to sexual purity, but this section right here is really in regards to all sin. It doesn't matter what struggle you're going through. It doesn't matter what's going on in your life. This is something that you can kind of relate to, and I'm just going to read a little section of this. And I've kind of edited it a little bit to be more
You
broad
summarized.
sin summarization, I guess. But here's what it says. The title is God is Waiting. Each one of us has been manipulated by our culture. Each of us has made choices to sin. To varying degrees, each of us became ensnared by these choices, but we can overcome this affliction. Far too often, however, we ignore our own responsibility in this. We complain, well, of course I want to be free from this stronghold. I've been to the altar 433 times about it, haven't I? It just doesn't seem to be God's will for me to be free. Not God's will. That's an offense to God's character. Don't blame God. His will is for you to have freedom from sin, and He has made a provision for it. Listen to these scriptures. Count yourself dead to sin, but alive to God in Christ Jesus. Therefore, do not let sin reign in your mortal body, so that you obey its evil desires. Do not offer the parts of your body to sin as instruments of wickedness, but rather offer yourselves to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and offer the parts of your body to Him as instruments of righteousness. For sin shall not be your master, because you are not under the law, but under grace. Romans 6:11-14. And then you have been set free from sin and have become slaves to righteousness. Romans 6:18. God is waiting for you, but He isn't waiting by the altar, hoping you'll drop by and talk for a while. He's waiting for you to rise up and engage in the battle. We have power through the Lord to overcome every level of sin. But if we don't utilize that power, we'll never break free from the habit. You see, sin isn't like a tumor growing out of control inside us. We treat it like a tumor when our prayers focus on deliverance as we plead for God to come remove it. Actually, sin is a series of bad decisions on our part and a byproduct of our immature characters. And deliverance won't deliver us into instant maturity. Character work needs to be done. Reading that, I was like, oh my goodness, I have to be the one to make that decision to follow Christ, to let Him remove that desire in me, to let Him remove that sin. But I have to be the one that allows that. I have to let Him work inside of my life, and I have to go to Him. I mean, it says going to the altar 433 times, like that's not going to be the answer, but we start there, right? We start by going to the altar and asking God, please help me. But then we have to make the decision on our own to let God work, to let God move inside of our lives, to be open-hearted to where God is leading us to move. And that's going to start with getting rid of whatever that sin is, whatever that struggle is that you have. You've got to let go of that stronghold. You've got to let it go and give it to God. That's how it works. And that's something that I had to do. I had to figure out how to do it because I could not live like that anymore.
Can I interject real quick?
Yeah.
And everything you just said, like I mentioned before, with like my fear and my worry and my stress, it's the same thing. I had to let it go and ask God to help me with it, but I had to make the choice to let go and stop being in control. And so that's just another example of how any sin can take over your life if you let it.
So how did I do that? Well, I started with, or how did I engage in the battle, as it says, is I started returning into heavily getting involved in church. During that early college time, I had kind of backed away. I wasn't as involved in youth because I was a college kid now. Youth is beneath me. No, youth was not beneath me. I went back into youth ministry with my mom because we were, again, without a youth minister. And then I got heavily involved in the church music at Alamo Heights. Just started working with the praise band, the youth praise band. And then we started integrating the youth praise band into the Sunday morning worship because that's something that God had placed in my heart. And so that got to do that for just a short time before I had to transfer to UTA. Oh darn, closer to Hannah. I know. So I transferred to UTA. No, I did not transfer to UTA because Hannah was there. I didn't even think about Hannah, ironically, that she was at DBU because I was not correlating how close they were together. By the way, they're only like 23 minutes and I think 54 seconds. Something like
You're
that.
making that up.
Yeah, I timed it one day. I really did. Without traffic. That's important. But anyway, so I transferred to UTA because God provided an opportunity for me to audition there. And He provided a scholarship opportunity for me to go there. While I was there, I joined a music service fraternity called Kappa Kappa Psi. And that was something that, I mean, again, my dad did it, and so I kind of wanted to do what he was doing, and it was fun. And then I went to my grandparents' church and played in their church orchestra for a little bit. And then my grandma did not like it, but I went to her and I told her, hey, I'm going to go to First Irving. And
You
the reason
remember
why I
I
went
said
to
I went
First
to First
Irving, that's where she went. That's not the only reason why that I went to First Irving, but while I was going to UTA, or while I started at UTA, Hannah had introduced me to a guy that wanted to start a community group at UT Arlington. And so I met up with him. We started this group of like 4 guys that grew into almost 10, I think, just meeting on campus. And through the conversations with the guy that she had connected me with, he constantly was talking about First Irving and First Irving College Ministry and everything about it. And I was like, man, that sounds really cool. I went to the college class at my grandparents' church, and it was like, what are we doing here? Like, it was not interesting. You could tell that the church was not quite college focused. But First Irving was. Their whole mindset was pour into the college ministry. And so I really ate that stuff up because I really enjoyed that. And it gave me an opportunity to be involved. We got connected with the one of the traditional worship pastor at First Irving, and he got me plugged into playing trumpet real quick when he found out that I was a trumpet player. And then on top of that, we started doing choir stuff together, and it was a lot of fun. So after a little while of being at First Irving, God started really preparing my heart for courtship. Now, courtship is a big term that just means I was looking for a dating with the intent of marriage. Not just a dating, not just, let's go have fun. No, I was looking for a future spouse. And really having that intent focus on making sure that this is not just something that is going to be a temporary fun time for me, but it's a permanent, like, we are going to build a life and we are going to build it centered around God. And that, I'm a little bit reluctant to mention this, but it was a book by Joshua Harris, which if you know anything about Joshua Harris, he is not a great guy anymore, but he used to be a prominent Christian author. He wrote a book called Boy Meets Girl, and it's about courtship. It was about how to go about dating with the intent of marriage and being Christ-honoring inside of that. Since then, again, don't go research any of his stuff now. I don't think he's got any books now, but he's kind of fallen off the deep end for whatever reason, which is very unfortunate. But anyways, so throughout all of this time, from the moment that I transferred to UTA, from the moment that I turned my heart back to God and started getting heavily involved in church, in different ministries inside of the church. God really instilled a servant's heart in me, where I really want to just go and serve, do what I can to help somebody else out. And that started with my mom, but it quickly turned into my own priority, just because of the various circumstances that I was in of being plugged in. So like I said at the beginning, like I didn't want to be a leader in youth. Well, now I do want to be a leader in the church. I want to do what I can to serve God, however He called me to serve. And one verse that really, it wasn't necessarily a turning point for me inside of after reading this verse, but every time that I hear this verse, and I'll kind of summarize it, every time I hear this verse or hear this parable, not parable, but anyway, every time I hear this, it really sets my heart on fire to go and do and go and serve. And it's when Jesus is talking about the final judgment in Matthew 25, he says, when the Son of Man comes in His glory and all the angels with Him, and He will sit on His glorious throne. Before Him will be gathered all the nations, and He will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates his sheep from the goats. And He will place the sheep on His right and the goats on His left. Then the King will say to those on His right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer Him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the King will answer them, "Truly I say to you, as you did to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me." And then he goes off and the exact opposite. When did we see you and not clothe you and not minister to you, basically? And if you didn't do it to me, if you didn't do it to the least of these, you didn't do it to me. And He casts them out. I don't want to be in that situation where I miss an opportunity to minister to those who God has placed in front of my path to minister to. Part of the reason why I am a teacher, why I am a band director now, yeah, it's because I love music, but it's because God has given me opportunities every single day to minister to the kids that are in front of me. No, I can't necessarily say, like, "Hey, you should come join me on the Christian side," and like, "Hey, let me talk to you about Christ." I can't do that at school, but there are still opportunities that God gives me whenever I'm one-on-one with a kid, just when they're coming to me with hurts, with pains, like, those are the opportunities that God gives me, and I try to take every single one of them. But even past that, going and just helping somebody out, like helping them move, helping them, give them some food to eat because they're hungry and they're standing on the side of the road, whatever the case may be. Like that's something that God has really placed on my heart to do, to be a servant. So that's pretty much most of my individual testimony.
So back to joint stuff. So like we talked about, so that's what these pictures are when we were dating in college, our pre-Hamilwrights, but we're still getting closer to being the Hamilwrights. So like Chris mentioned, he started coming to First Irving. We hung out a few times before that because we did know each other, and I knew he didn't really know anybody up in the DFW area. We had a couple other friends that went to DBU who we also went to high school with, so we all kind of hung out at times. But one day after church, Chris asked me to go to Jack in the Box with him for lunch.
It was an unofficial, official date.
But it wasn't a date because I didn't think it was a date.
I did not tell her it was a date, but it was a date.
But it wasn't.
And I'm sticking to that story.
So we did that, and it was good. You know, it was good to have lunch together. And
by the way, we both hate Jack in the Box. We don't like it.
Sorry, I don't know why we went there.
But I had a coupon that my grandma gave me And we are cheap college kids, and so we eat on the cheap all the time.
So before we started dating, after this little not date, I actually didn't want to start liking him again. And I didn't want to date him because I didn't want to do it just because I was comfortable with him and I knew him. So I literally had one of my good friends who did an awful job at it, but I asked her to keep me accountable to not like him. That obviously didn't work.
And then on our wedding day, she told that story.
Yeah, she's my matron of honor.
She was the matron of honor, and she did a terrible job.
Yeah.
Awful job.
But
Praise the Lord.
so while we were in college, we dated for 2 years. And then if you want to go to the next slide, we were engaged for 1 year and 3 months so we could finish out college. It was a very long time, but we wanted to finish college first.
Now, I know you can't read that, but the bottom one where we're standing on the railroad tracks, my shirt says I Heart Music, and her shirt says randomly burst into song.
Warning, randomly burst into song.
Yeah. So
Because we're both music majors,
yeah.
and like I said, we're nerds. So that was some of our engagement pictures. So then we finally got married. We were finally the Hamillwrights. And so I graduated in May 2014. Chris graduated in December of 2014. And
I don't know how that worked at all. Like, I am a year older than her, and she still graduated half a year earlier than me. I don't know
half
how
a year.
that works.
Anyway, you had to do student teaching.
Crazy.
But for teaching, when you graduate in December, necessarily getting a teaching job right away is rare. And if there is a job opening, why is it open mid-school year? Usually that means it probably was not a good situation at the school. So you don't always want to take those jobs, even if they're open. So I was briefly working at a doctor's office after college, and Chris was subbing and applying and applying and applying.
So I had zero desire to come back to Port Lavaca and Victoria. Had zero desire.
Me too.
Like, we grew up here. We know this life. We knew everything about it, and we didn't really want to come back. We got accustomed to being in the DFW, Dallas-Fort Worth area, and we loved it. There was a lot of stuff to do over there, but it was not God's plan for our life, because as soon as I started applying, I was only applying to Dallas-Fort Worth and surrounding areas. That was it. That's all I wanted to do. But God was not giving me interviews. Like, I was not allowed to have an interview even with people. And I had several connections up there, but it didn't work. And so what happened was we decided, okay, well, right after we got married, we started saving up money and doing some fundraisers to go to a mission trip in Honduras. And our music pastor at the time said, hey, you just got to wait for this mission trip, because every single time I went on a mission trip, the Lord moved and something happened. And here, lo and behold, we're on the bus driving down to the airport on our mission trip to Honduras, and I get a call from my mom, who was working at Port Lavaca at Calhoun County, and she said, hey, we still have this job opening for the head director, and we can't fill it. We know that you still haven't gotten a job yet, so you should apply. Go apply right now.
And we're like, we're on the bus to the airport. He can't apply right now. And I just remembered, honestly, truthfully, honestly, I broke down crying on that bus, because, I don't want to move back to Port Lavaca, Victoria. We don't want to live there. How can this be where we're supposed to be? We grew up there. It just did not want to move back at all. But
we always joked that Port Lavaca was the black hole of Calhoun High School graduates, because if you ever come back, you can't leave. I made it out. I made it to Victoria, so that's good.
But we went on the mission trip, which is those 4 pictures kind of all to one side. It's a great trip. And we came back. He applied for the job. He interviewed, and they called him the same day, next day.
It was the same day.
Same day, and he was hired. And
And
do you wanna share that
then
part?
I think it
Okay.
was like a week later, or maybe 2 weeks later, my mom was coming up with the youth to Waxahachie, which was not quite halfway. It was more closer to us, just doing a quick camp of sorts. And she brought over the contract for me to sign. And so it was a Wednesday, so I go meet her down at Waxahachie, sign it, start walking. That's a long walk. Started driving back to First Irving, where we were doing our Wednesday night fellowship. And that evening, our worship pastor comes up to me and shows me a text on his phone from a Irving band director saying, "Hey, is your UTA guy still looking for a job?"
Nope.
The day that I signed the contract for coming down to Calhoun. And I had to tell him no. And I knew in my heart, I could have easily said, all right, I'm going to dishonor that contract and I'm going to take this job opportunity. But I knew in my heart, for some reason, I was supposed to go back home. Thank God I did. Because this has been one of the most what's the word I'm looking for?
Like we've
I'm
grown.
having an Aiden moment right now.
Like we've been growing in our faith.
Growing,
and
I guess.
I don't know where to go with this.
It was the most growing opportunity for me in my career.
Oh, okay.
Just being under my dad. My dad was my boss. He took over the high school job. I took over the middle school job. And I learned so much just because I got to work under my dad. Not a lot of band directors can say that. And so even past that, now I'm working in Victoria. Well, now my dad is working with me with our high school kids, teaching lessons. And so I still get to have that bond. And it's been a huge blessing that I would never have gotten if I had stayed up in the Metroplex.
And so, like we both did in college, we knew when we moved down here we had to find a church home. We also knew we didn't want to live in Port Lavaca, so even though we drove to Port Lavaca for work, we lived here in Victoria because we knew there'd be better church options that would fit us in our phase of life. And so we visited Northside, I think for about a month, and then we joined. And we quickly got involved in the music ministry, and that's expounded over the years. And now we're involved in music ministry. I help with the women's ministry. It's been such a blessing. And every time we think about why did God bring us here, it's been clear that it was to serve at Northside and also for the opportunities like Chris mentioned with his job. And Northside's the first church that I've actually got to work for and for that calling. So in all that my meantime, I was doing a bunch of random jobs. And I was like, God, what am I doing? Why am I working at a doctor's office? Why am I working at a middle school as a principal's secretary? This is not what I want to do. But all of those things I learned at those jobs now help me in the job I have now. And so even when you're in the middle of something and you're like, I don't want to do this, but it's something God's provided, there's a reason, even though you can't see it at that time. And so if you want to go ahead to the next one, there's just some more pictures of us married life. But there's a verse that about 3 years ago, I stumbled across, and it's Proverbs 19:21. And it says, "Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but is the purpose of the Lord that will stand." And as we were preparing our testimony tonight, I just kept thinking about that verse and how it didn't matter what we wanted or what we did. Like I said, I didn't want to date him again. But the Lord's plan, his purpose, his will for your life will stand. It will happen. And so the question is, are you going to fight it, or are you going to work with him and for it? And you won't always at the time understand it, but as you go through your life and you look back, you're going to see those moments in your life where the Lord grew you and pushed you and helped you learn, and that his will prevailed through it. So that is the journey of the Hams, which is what we like to say for us. So.
So Chris has this fantastic thing that he does every so often. If you go into my office and everything's turned upside down, Chris Hamilwright, y'all. Yeah. Every time I walk in.
Not every time.
Every time I walk in, and that has happened, I turn around, I go out to Hannah's desk and say, "Your husband." And she just laughs. So, in a couple of weeks, you'll get to hear Chris's mom and dad's testimony, which I've heard bits and pieces they've shared in the Ecclesia service. So, maybe one day we can have Hannah's mom and dad, which Hannah's dad serves as a senior pastor in the Killeen area. Mom works with a school district for.
So sorry, I'm forgetting my parents. My sophomore year of college, they moved to Killeen. They started a church plant there. So my dad's the lead pastor. My mom, she's a counselor, and she's contracted with a company that allows her to work in the school with military kids. So Killeen's by Fort Hood. So she works in the school, but not for the district, and she gets to counsel military kids.
You got that? So, cool. We're going to pray over them, and then we're going to close out tonight. And let's take care of business, do what we need to do. Also, remember that this Saturday is the first Upward Soccer game. Everything starts at 9 o'clock. If you want to have some money to go towards camp, at 8 o'clock we do setup. At 8:45 you need to be here to ref. And everything should be done by 11:30 if you stay to help clean up. If you want to get cash money for refereeing, you can do that, or you can put it towards Northside Bucks to help with whatever event. Also, this Sunday after church, if you're a junior, we will be having your class meeting right after church. We'll come up here, sit down, and have a conversation. So make sure that you plan for that. If you're in the junior class, we still haven't decided what we're doing for lunch that day. So if you have a suggestion, text me. All right? On Sunday. Cameron, Sunday. You have connections. All right. Let's pray, and we will close out with one more worship song. Father God, I thank you for Chris and Hannah and Sarah and Evelyn. And Father, I thank you for the opportunity for us to get to hear their story. And Father, I know that this is not our story. But Father, as we hear so many different testimonies from so many different people and so many different walks of life, Father, I pray that we're able to make connections and be encouraged that our story does matter to the kingdom. And Father, as we're faithful, you are faithful. And I pray that as you move and work in our hearts and our lives and you plant our steps where they go, Father, that we will grow and prosper in you and people will be able to see you in us. So, Father, tonight I just pray a blessing over this sweet family and pray that you continue to hold them accountable and hold them close to you. So, Father, I just pray as we dismiss tonight that you'll watch over us and protect us, bring us back together.